Okay. Good. Hello and welcome to the Electronics Watch webinar. The webinar's title is The Impact of COVID-19 on Electronics from Mining to Manufacturing and Public Procurement. How are workers and communities coping, and how can public procurement support? The webinar is part of our series of public webinars, which we produce supported by the EU-funded project Make ICT Fair. We have organized this webinar in cooperation with the Fair ICT Flanders project. Before we start off, let me run through some housekeeping with you. Please keep yourself muted. You are actually already muted to avoid any background noise. Be advised, this webinar is being recorded and will be available on the Electronics Watch website for all that could not participate today. After our four experts, Charlotte, Omana, Kim, and Mike have presented on the three main areas of mining, manufacturing, and public procurement, there will be ample time for Q&A. If you want to ask a question, please use the Q&A chat for this. Just write your question and we will record it and communicate this question to our presenters. Should your question be to one presenter directly, please state so. You can obviously write your questions already during the presentations. With the high numbers of participants, I want to give a brief introduction into the work of Electronics Watch to explain the expansive character of this webinar from mining to manufacturing and public procurement. Electronics Watch provides independent monitoring for public procurement, focusing on the electronics industry. Our mission is to help public sector organizations work together and collaborate with civil society monitors in production regions to protect the rights of workers in their electronic supply chains. With our worker-driven monitoring, we provide public buyers with follow-up capacities for their contractual obligations that focus on worker rights. Our international network of local monitoring partners gives public buyers eyes and ears on the ground in electronics production regions. Bringing together local civil society organizations and public buyers, we can detect problems workers do not usually report to social auditors, remedy problems in a timely manner, and address systemic issues over time. Socially responsible public procurement is highly innovative. Thus, we provide also a platform for our affiliates to exchange on their experiences and expertise. The two networks of expertise, worker-driven monitoring and public procurement, have obviously distinct geographies that we bring together for impact. If you want to know about our recent successes resulting, for example, in sizable reimbursements for migrant workers in Thailand and Malaysia, please go to our news sections on our website. Our main focus is on the manufacturing part of the electronic supply chain, final assembly and component factories. Knowing that this electronic supply chain is reaching down to mining, we have been part of the EU-funded Make ICT Fair project since late 2017. With 10 partner organizations, we have been working, learning, and developing on issues linked to mining. One of the many outputs we have developed is in cooperation with ICLEI, the recently published criteria set for responsible public procurement, which is publicly available. We have developed a better understanding as Electronics Watch on how to integrate mining issues into public procurement to enable monitoring in the future. One of the outcomes for Electronics Watch was a first pilot monitoring of nickel mines in the Philippines, funded by Bread for All and conducted by our monitoring partners PARC from Japan. Currently, we are setting up a project of pilot monitoring in mines in Bolivia, DRC, and the Philippines, also funded by Bread for All. As everybody else, the global COVID-19 crisis also impacts us and our work. And also every worker in the electronics supply chain. We decided to set up a section on our website that focuses on the issues we see in the supply chain. Here you can find videos and interviews with our monitoring partners from various countries on the situation and the hardships that workers are facing. We have also accounts from our affiliates on how they as public buyers are dealing with the challenges and how they engage with their supply chain to make sure that during this time the rights of workers are in place. In the beginning of March, focusing on the situation in China, we released a guidance for public buyers to support their engagement with suppliers. And currently, as we all know, the epidemic is now a global pandemic. This is why we just released a global assessment tool to support public buyers in their efforts to ensure human rights due diligence in their supply chains. We have worked with the experts of the United Nations Development Program on this tool. This is also publicly available. With this, I would like to hand over to Charlotte Christiaens. Charlotte works for CATAPA, a Belgian civil society organization with a huge expertise on mining in Latin America. So, Charlotte, if you can unmute yourself and share your screen with us.
Oh, first the host has to disable
okay.
the screen sharing. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Are you now able to share?
Yes, I am.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, we see your screen.
Okay, perfect. So good morning, everyone, at least from for the people who are in Europe, and yeah, good day for the ones who are flying from other parts in the world. So I would like to give a small overview of the impact of COVID-19 on the mineral supply chain, especially from the mining side. Most of the information I'm going to share with you now is based on small conversations I had with local communities in Latin America, since CATAPA is working more than 15 years now in Latin America, and most of our contacts and partner organizations are located over there. So I thought it was important to tell this to you before we start with the presentation. So first I want to give an overview on the perspective of mining before COVID-19. I think it's important to understand that the reputation of mining companies was already very bad for most of the local communities we used to work with. Mining often causes a lot of big social and environmental impacts. For example, a lot of negative impact on water resources. There is a lot of toxic deposits who stay there in the environment. It's a risky business due to the fragile tailing dams who sometimes also crack down and causes major environmental disasters. There is also a low employment rate for the local communities. It is increasing social inequality, and there is also a big lack of trust in most of the mining cases we are working with local communities. We see then also that most of the voices are actually ignored by the mining companies, because it's of course a business who makes a lot of profit, so it's not always they're not always eager to listen to the voices of the local communities. And we also see that a lot of corruption is going on, which is actually not good for the relation with the local communities. So this is important to understand before we go to what is happening now in COVID times. We see that there is a huge impact on financial level. In the beginning, when the lockdown started, we saw that many mining sites were closing down or working on limited capacity. A lot of their employees had to go back to their communities and their families. Actually, this was really in the beginning because very fast it was already changing, and we saw that mining was seen as an essential business, and lots of mining sites start reopening again. So it actually changed very fast. It's hard to say a lot of the financial impact at this moment because it's really depending on the governmental reactions, demand of the minerals, which is at this moment very low, since a lot of factories are also closed on the other side of the world, so on the other side of the supply chain. And it also depends on the duration of the crisis. On a few months, it's hard to see what is going on the next months and years. But what we really see is that there is a mineral price drop with most of the minerals. I looked up, for example, the value of palladium for the last 6 months. I looked it up on Kitco, and we see that there is actually a decrease in the value of US dollar per ounce. But that does not count for gold. Gold is a very stable mineral. It has this historical value, and also during time of crisis before, a lot of people start investing in this stable product because it's not really losing their value. We also saw, for example, that Teck was closing down his copper production, at least for a while, because lots is reopening again. What is then the impact on workers and communities? With this, I want to address the mining workers, but also the communities and their families. We see that they live in high-risk situation at this moment. You see here a picture of a mining village in Peru, where you see that they live very close to each other. Dorms and cafeteria are shared. Also bus terminals and a lot of common places are shared. So it's very hard to keep the social distance. Also, they often work together in subterranean mines where you're close to each other. So it's really hard to keep this social distance. That's why they are often seen also as super spreaders, because they travel a lot and they are still in contact with a lot of people. So there are a lot of cases at this moment. But they're also feeling a lot of insecurity because there is not a lot of access to hospitals. There is also not a lot of tests at this moment. It's very limited. Also, their contracts are often suspended or they're in uncertain condition. Before, they also went to local markets, but it's not possible anymore because they are closed now. So there's limited access to food and drinks, lots of militarization. In some areas, we see also that indigenous communities go back deep into the jungle. They don't have access anymore with the rest of the world, so they cannot trade their products anymore, but they are deep into the jungle because they fear to be affected by COVID-19. And also the lack of transport is a big issue for most of these companies. And then we, I also wanted to share the document which was published by Mining Watch Canada and some other organizations, Voice from the Ground, because in 4 statements they try to summarize how the global mining industry is profiting from the pandemic. And actually, what is said in this document is also really covering the stories of what I hear from the local communities I am in touch with daily. So the first statement is that mining companies are ignoring the real threats of the pandemic and continue to operate using means available. Mining is seen as an essential business. For example, on the 15th of March, the Peruvian government declared a state of sanitary emergency, but permitted mining companies to continue working at reduced capacity due to their strategic nature. Hudbay announced that it would follow the government's direction and continues his activities. And then we saw that 21 confirmed cases of miners were there in Hudbay. On the 2nd of June, according to Mining Watch Canada, we saw that 4,000 miners over the world were already contaminated by COVID-19. So they are seen as hotspots for the spread of COVID-19. Another statement is that governments around the world are taking extraordinary measures to shut down legitimate protests and promote the mining sector. So, for example, in Peru and Colombia, we see a lot of militarization. So militarians are used to guarantee the quarantine and the lockdown, that people stay inside. But at the same moment, they are also abusing their power, and social leaders and human defenders are in great risk because there is not a lot of social control, and this powerful militarians use their power against them. And we see also a lot of prohibition of street marches, which is actually giving the mining sector much more opportunities to negotiate with government, to start new concessions, to start new deals, because the resistance at this moment, or at least the visual resistance in the streets, is low because it's forbidden at this moment. These are also two examples how the lockdown is abused by mining companies. For example, there is an ignorance of the state of emergency in Ecuador to push the mining operations. And we saw that in this case, more than 100 organizations expressed their solidarity to the people of Shuar Aritam, which is located in Ecuador, because they do believe that it's important not to start with this mining project. And also, we saw this statement of the Canadian minister who said that COVID-19 lockdown is a great time to build pipelines because there's not a lot of social resistance, at least in the streets, and the streets are empty, so it's using this opportunity. Mining companies are often seen as saviors out of this economic crisis, especially local press is publishing articles about the heroes. So they publish all the time articles about the donations they give to the state, how they take care of public healthcare, because they are the ones who are building the hospitals or maintaining the hospitals. We often also see that mining companies these days are giving support to local small enterprises to make sure they're not collapsing. Most of Latin American governments do believe that mining projects will finance this economic crisis and will be the way out too. And then, we see that also the concessions are given during this empty period. And especially in Peru, where we are working, we see that they restart negotiating with the government to start again the exploitation of emblematic mining cases, Estia Maria and Congo. You have to know that there is resistance, big resistance of local communities going on against these mining projects for years. And these projects were on hold because of the resistance and also because of the uncertain financial situation. But now we see that the negotiations are restarting, so it's really freaking out the local communities at this moment. More negative impact is the deforestation, which is increasing. We see that 150% of the deforestation is happening at this moment during the crisis. People are going back to the forest to supply themselves for food and wood. And we also see that illegal small-scale mines, especially the ones, the gold mines, are increasing again in this periods. If we look to future trends, then we have to look in short-term, medium-term, and long-term. In the short term, we see that it's hitting prices, hitting production, hitting also shareholders. We see a diminution in demand. So reduction of new projects, except one from gold. And we see also a reduction in operational costs, wage, safety, and environmental control, which is of course very bad for the local communities. On the midterm, we see that there is going to be a global economic recession, but mining is often presented as the strategic sector for economic growth. So also to get out of this economic crisis. And on the long term, it's very uncertain at the moment. It's really depending on governmental reactions, free market reactions, duration of the crisis, how the factories on the other side of the world are going to react, how consumers are going to react. Will there be a degrowth? Will there be an increase in demand again, or a decrease? It really depends on. It's very uncertain at this moment to know. But we do think that there's going to be an increasing in unemployment in this sector, because there will be a lot of automatization. So yeah, to conclude, what I've been saying till now is very bad news, is a very bad story, but we also see lots of messages appearing that we should grab this opportunity. The COVID-19 global pandemic will become the most defining economic and social event in decades, also strongly impact the mining industry. So we really hope that this crisis can be reoriented towards a more circular economy and degrowth instead of strengthening the current business models. Extractivism will not be the way out of the crisis, because of the reason I said in the beginning of this presentation. It has a lot of negative impacts. And a just transition is more important than ever, since a lot of communities are suffering already a lot. There is a lot of income loss and a lot of environmental damage already. So yeah, just transition is the only way out. Yeah, I think I have to end my presentation here. If you want to know more about CATAPA, then you can visit our websites. We also have a blog on what is happening in Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, and Colombia during these crisis times. So please have a look if you want to have more details, and you can also always contact me.
Thank you, Charlotte, for this overview and this deep dive into the situation in Latin America. What fascinates me on the most is how mining companies are seen as the solution for this situation. It's obviously, we should definitely discuss this during our Q&A session a bit more. If you have any questions, you can use the Q&A chat where you can just post the questions, and we will come back to those during our Q&A session. Next up, we have Omana George, who is the network monitoring coordinator at Electronics Watch, and Omana will present on the impacts of COVID on workers in Asia. Omana, please.
Thank you, Peter. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope all of you are having a good day. Before I go into my actual presentation, I want to give you a little bit of a background. Electronics Watch, as you know, is a monitoring organization. And the information that I'll be sharing with you over the next 10 minutes is what we have heard from the ground from our monitoring partners across this region. They are from Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam, India, Thailand, Malaysia, and China. Our monitoring partners are researchers and workers' rights organizations who have been working tirelessly during these unprecedented times of COVID-19 to provide support to workers on the ground by keeping in touch with them regularly with timely support and assistance in terms of relief, access to medical care, educational information for workers on COVID-19. In addition, they've also been helping to provide legal aid and advocacy for cases of workers who are facing loss of wages, loss of benefits, and jobs. Our monitoring partners have provided Electronics Watch with updates and reports over the past few months of the COVID pandemic, which has helped us gain direct understanding of the situation of workers on the ground in the electronic supply chain in this region. Next slide, please. During this presentation, I will be looking at the issues which impact workers, responses from the government, and finally, some reflections and the way forward. Next slide, please. Some of the main risks which we have heard from our partners, the first one is supply chain disruptions, job loss, and reduced hours of work. Over the past few months, due to disruptions in the supply chain due to the COVID lockdowns, this has affected orders, components not being available to meet deadlines, production and distribution being affected, and causing serious disruptions in deliveries. This, of course, has had a direct impact of workers on the ground in terms of loss of work and reduced hours of work. Our monitoring partner in Indonesia reported that workers in the electronics sector have lost, about 13,000 workers have lost jobs in the city of Batam, which is an electronics production hub. They've been laid off, and many of them have also not received severance pay as required by law. The next point I want to highlight is the shift towards precarious work. In Indonesia, again, a monitoring partner has learned that some companies are dismissing regular workers to bring in contract workers. Workers are also reporting less work, less wages, and less working days. And this is reflected in many countries where we are getting updates from. In China and the Philippines, our monitoring partners shared that management are using different ways to increase time of work on the days when workers are present, like canceling breaks. Previously, they would have 15 minutes breaks after 2 hours of work. This is canceled. And it seems to be even more difficult for workers to get toilet breaks. Other hazards and safety issues are being ignored. In the race of completing orders and deliveries, it has been observed in the Philippines, Indonesia, and China. Our partners who are working on the ground report that in the time of COVID, longer working hours are very common. And workers, because of this, have to stay on the site. They sleep, they rest in dormitories, on the floor, and in the tables where they are working. They don't really have a choice about this. This makes them even more vulnerable and exposes them to a higher risk, and their health may be affected. This is an occupational health and safety concern, making them vulnerable to other hazards in the workplace, in addition to COVID. Our monitoring partners across the region share similar concerns that in many workplaces, social distancing is not done and workers are not being given adequate PPEs to protect themselves and their health. Migrant workers are trapped because many a time, because of their lockdowns, they were unable to go back home. And this leads them to be trapped in their areas of work in the industrial zones. Next slide, please. Here are some of the effects on employment. Reduced capacity of operations and lack of orders, reduced working hours and wages, leave without pay, saving costs by cutting down hours of work, fewer working days but longer hours of work, shift to contract work, and loss of employment. This is some of the changes which we have heard. Across the region, our monitoring partners have reported of these situations, and they are taking a huge toll on workers to keep their jobs and income, as they have to sustain themselves and their families who depend on their income. At the same time, some workers report that their companies are trying to do right for them. For example, in India, during the lockdown in the months of March and April, a monitoring partner reported that in the Sri Perumbudur region of Tamil Nadu, workers received their wages, and in the month of May, factories resumed production to a limited extent by mid-May. In Vietnam, many companies did not dismiss their workers, but they tried to keep them. Workers were able to retain their jobs by reducing work time. However, this meant that the workers do not have overtime, which then led to a significant reduction of income. Next slide, please. Increased risk to migrant workers. During the lockdown, migrant workers have been trapped, of course, because of many of the reasons mentioned above. Their wages have also been reduced. Exposure to local workers who have the freedom to move around more, crowded working and living conditions. In Malaysia, our monitoring partners updated that migrant workers feel that their situation is even more vulnerable than regular workers, as they are trapped in their workplaces and dormitories, unable to leave because of the lockdowns, or because they need to keep their job to pay off the recruitment debts. They are anxious about local workers who they work alongside with, who leave their workplace every day, go home, and return the next day. And they could be exposed to COVID-19 outside and then pass it on to the migrant workers who they work with. A monitoring partner in Malaysia reported that in many workplaces, there has not been a lot of changes done to ensure physical distancing. workers tend to work in close proximity in canteens, work areas, locker rooms, and dormitories. Next slide, please. Government responses. I have 3 examples of government responses. The first one is from India. Our monitoring partner reported that there is an alarming development in the past few weeks, a move to suspend various labor laws by several state governments, including Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, and Gujarat, are being proposed. This has been justified as necessary to revive industrial activity and to attract more foreign investment. If implemented, the changes would also allow for higher labor flexibility, a hire and fire policy to be adopted, along with increased working hours and overtime, third-party inspections, and simplified registration and license procedures. In the absence of essential labor laws that were already very poorly implemented in many cases, workers will be simply left with no legal revenue to exercise their rights or bring up employment-related grievances. In Indonesia, it was reported that the government was reluctant to impose a lockdown when the virus was increasingly spreading. And employers require workers to work without providing them adequate safety equipment. According to the Ministry of Manpower, the total number of workers who have been fired is about 2 million workers across the country in different sectors. Furthermore, using force majeure, which means unseeable circumstances and therefore the inability to fulfill a contract, some employers have used this clause to refuse to pay severance fee to the workers when they lost their jobs. In China, Notice 5 was released on 24 January 2020 with measures to control COVID-19. It requires employers to pay employees who miss work, either due to illness, suspected illness, seclusion following close proximity of being exposed to infected people, or because of restrictions like lockdowns and the inability to move from one region to the other. It also prohibits employers from dismissing protected employees, including workers who are recovering from an illness, who are in quarantine, workers who have missed work because of emergency policies, and also during the time of recovery, they are fully protected. It also, Notice 5 also requires employers whose production is stopped by the epidemic to pay through for the first month fully, and if production does not resume, offer employees minimum living subsidies defined by the government in their region. Our monitoring partners also reported that the government had a policy to extend Chinese New Year paid leave for workers during the pandemic. Next slide, please. Some of the reflections and the way forward based on all the information we've gathered from the ground. I have proposed some for different categories. The first one is for employers. The COVID situation has demonstrated the need for workplace and safety policies and guidelines against infectious diseases and epidemics to be developed, and this is really essential. This includes guidelines and procedures for testing, transparency, and treatment to ensure safe and healthy workplaces for all workers. For brands, in the current situation of disruptions in the supply chain, orders being disrupted, and pressures to meet deliveries among lockdown, in many workplaces, monitoring partners reported that production is being rushed. Workers in some situations end up working longer hours and in working conditions that they are not very different from pre-COVID times. While the need to meet deliveries is crucial, making necessary adjustments to ensure workplaces are safe for those working on the production line is very important. Because if this is not done, we could have much bigger problems of an outbreak inside the factory And this would lead to shutdown of the factory, quarantine, sanitizing, treatment, and recovery of the workers who are sick. This will cause a lot more problems for the factory and the workplace. And therefore, in the long run, with a long-term vision of providing safer workplaces is much more important and will make sure that workers will have a safe and healthy environment to work in. For workers, we've learned that organized workers and workplaces are safer. Our monitoring partner in the Philippines observed that workplaces which are unionized have been able to provide support and protection for workers. If workers contract the disease, rapid testing and quarantine, and overall better social economic protection for workers was observed. For the civil society, we've learned that civil society has been enormously important for workers and have been instrumental in supporting workers during these times. In Indonesia, our partners updated that during this COVID crisis, when workers have been struggling with job losses and reduced work, peasant workers have supported urban workers by providing them with cheaper priced food or donating for free to assist urban workers. Civil society is helping workers in terms of food shortage and lesser income by providing relief in terms of food, supplies, access to medical care. This was reported in the Philippines, Malaysia, Thailand, and Indonesia. For public buyers, communicating with companies and suppliers to ensure additional safety measures are done in workplaces to protect workers is really vital. As Peter had mentioned earlier, Electronics Watch has 2 COVID-19 tools for public buyers, and both of them are available on our website. This brings me to my end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Omana, for this for these quite horrific insights on what is happening to provide us with the ICT that we need to work on, as well as with the ventilators that actually are a substantial part of health relief, as they are also electronics that are being produced in these countries. And next up, we have Ha Kim from Vietnam. Ha is working at the Center for Development and Integration in Vietnam. And Ha and her organization are a long-term monitoring partner with Electronics Watch. So we are very happy to hear from her. Ha will be talking about the situation in Vietnam and what is happening, so we kind of get a more detailed look at one country in Asia. Thank you, Ha. I see you're already taking over.
Hello, everyone. I'm talking from Hanoi, Vietnam, and today we'll share with you a brief update about the impact of COVID-19 on electronics workers in Vietnam. And this is a rapid assessment which was conducted in April and May 2020 by CA. And in my presentation, I will try to update about the current situation in Vietnam, the main issue that we recall from the worker interviews, how the worker perceive the company's action towards the COVID-19, and what the worker expect, also the expectation in the coming time. So to give you an update about the country context, in comparison to other countries in the world, I think the situation in Vietnam is a little bit better. By today, there was nearly there has been 349 confirmed case. And most of the patients were recovered, and we have no death so far. So this is really the huge effort of the government and all the people in Vietnam to control the disease. In terms of the process, I mean the progress of controlling the COVID-19 in Vietnam, we can see in two stages. Firstly, in January to February, there was an outbreak in China and other countries. And in Vietnam, there were 16 people were infected nCoV virus. Most of them are the worker coming back from China. And up to February 13, all of them has been killed completely. However, on the school and agency and company have applied the initial measure to prevent the COVID-19, and all the school has been closed from the beginning of February. During the 2 stages from 6th March up to present, the source of spreading mainly from overseas students, foreign tourists, and some patients from the hospital in Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City. And the government had put the situation under very tight control through tracking, tracing, and quarantining to control the disease. And on the 1st of April, the government officially announced the outbreak of COVID-19 in Vietnam. So it's a little bit late in comparison to other countries. Only until the 1st of April, we announced the outbreak, and we officially set the social distancing for almost 1 month. By the end of April, when everything seems to be okay, then people can come to the new normal, new period of the new normal. And we have now very familiar with the new normal terms in Vietnam. Despite actually because of the social distancing and many other measures to control the disease, there are a lot of economic loss for the country. However, according to the export statistic of the first 6 months of the year, the manufacturing and export of phone and computer and electronic device still increase in comparison to the last year, to the same term of the last year. If you see to the graphic on the screen, you will see that the phone and parts and also the export of phone and parts and computers and electronic device still among the top of export of the country. And even the computer and electronic device has increased in comparison to the last year.
You don't move on with your slides, so we still see your first slide as a big slide.
Let me check because I have moved on.
Oh, so you probably we see your other screen, I guess. If you go out of your presentation mode and then just go through the slides, this will be probably easier.
So I will stop sharing and we start sharing again. I will try it.
Okay.
Sorry.
Oh, now we see the slide. Yes, thank you.
So sorry for the problem. Okay, I hope that you have seen, this is the update of the country context. Sorry that you might not see it before. And I'm talking about the export statistic of the first 6 months of the year. Thank you, Peter. And you can see, now you can see the slide, right?
Yes, we can. We can.
Yeah, thank you. So you can see that the export of phone and computers and electronic devices has increased. It's very different from other industry. Most of other industry has decreased the export in the first 6 months of the year, but the electronics get a higher export. The phone and parts are a little bit lower than last year, but still higher than other industry. In April, the Ministry of Trade has conducted a survey to nearly 130,000 business, and it showed that 86% of business in Vietnam has been negatively affected by COVID-19. However, also this report acknowledged that the electronic industry still increase and develop despite the pandemic. It is expected that the electronic industry might have more difficult in the Q3 and Q4, the last quarter of the years, because they don't have the new order in the coming time. So in April, my CDI have participated in a research by ILO and the International Labour Organization and ERC Research Center in Vietnam. Actually, this research was conducted for 5 industries, including electronics, garment, wood and timber, shoes, and tourism. And CDI have participated only in electronics and garment industry. So from the data we have and the interview conducted, which has 59 workers interviewed from 33 electronic companies. We have some initial or we can call rapid assessment for you. And this is for your information and very first idea about the situation of electronic workers in Vietnam. This is not the official and the full report from ILO. The report will be public later. And this is not reflect the ILO perspective, I have to say. And this is CDI's analysis based on the interview which we have conducted. So from the rapid assessment and interview, we see that most of the workers in electronics company participated in the research are under the age of 30. They are quite young. And they come from 9 provinces and cities in Vietnam. Most of them work for FDI enterprise. Because of the COVID-19, we have recorded some main issues for the business, for the companies. The most negative thing to the electronics business is that they could not import the material during the first quarter of the year. So this caused a temporary shortage of material for their production. Another thing is that because of the social distancing, so some workers, some workshops cannot be open or operate fully, and worker cannot go to work. Another thing is that the company, from the worker, they said that the company also record the market reductions, and they are afraid of having less order. In order to cope with the situation, some electronics business have to cut off the labor cost, and also other costs. And how they do it? Firstly, and very popular one, is that they try to rearrange the production line and they reduce the overtime working. And here you can see the statistic, our analysis. You can see that the overtime had been dramatically reduced. Another practice is that the company allowing the company only pay a part of basic salary because the wage in Vietnam include a basic salary and other allowance and also overtime payment. So the company try to maintain the basic salary and within the standard working hour. Some company, they allowing the workers to leave job temporarily. This is not for a long time. For some company, the worker have to stop working for 1 week or 2 weeks, and then they come back to work for 1 or 2 more weeks, and then they take leave again. And for the day they leave, they could not be paid as required, at least with the minimum wage. And the group of workers we are the most vulnerable ones are the workers who have short-term labor contracts or who have been working very manual and simple work. We often call the rank and file workers. The migrant workers, the domestic migrant workers, or the junior worker who have less experience or they are not very skillful in their work. And some female worker, especially the pregnant worker, they have finishing labor contract or their labor contract was terminated during the COVID-19. They are at the high risk of being fired or cut the labor cost because the contract was terminated at the time of the pandemic. When being asked about the impact to the workers, most of the workers said that the income has been reduced much, and you can see from the statistic that nearly half of the workers, actually 42% of the workers reported that their income reduced from 20 to 50%. So it's so that the basic salary is just very basic one, and the major part, the other part of their wage include overtime working and the allowance, the bonus are also important, but have been reduced. So even some workers have income lower than the reasonable minimum wage. And this is reported by some companies. In order to adapt with the situation and remain in the industrial zone, the worker have to look for external support. Nearly 1/3 of them have to look for more job or alternative, even the temporary one. But one thing is very significant here is that nearly 60% of them said that they had no solutions because they said that this is a pandemic which is out of control and they don't know what to do, and they don't have any plan or solution to cope with the situation, and their lives very unstable. Also,
if you could speed up a bit because we are already over time. Thank you.
Yeah. And also the worker report a lot of negative feeling on the time during the time of crisis, like the worries, the up and down mood, and more during the social distancing. This is very easy to understand. We have asked them how their company handle the situations, and they said that yeah, as you know, that most of the factory cut the labor cost and rearrange the labor. When they do that, more than half of the factory, they don't discuss with anyone or inform the worker. They just make the decision and announce. However, because the worker know the situation and they, most of them, 85% of them agree that this is acceptable and they agree with that. And when we ask them about the expectation and how the workers think about the next 2 months, 30% of them said that they feel like getting bad and they don't have positive scenario about the economic and also their income, their employment, and also about the future of their job. So this is a very highlight issue to them. And the workers have a great demand on training, on occupational health and safety, and they need more support on basic service like renting house or other living costs. They also need a new job and other support in the short term. But for the long term, since they said that they don't know and they have very negative perspective about the future, so they don't have clear picture about what the future will be. So this is very brief update from our interview and also our work with the worker group in Vietnam. I think that we will have more discussion if you have questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Ha, for this very detailed picture that shows us, and I think that's for me one takeaway, that management is very often going the very easy route of just cutting costs through cutting labor costs, and this is obviously always at the expense of the most vulnerable parts in production. So let's go to our last presentation for today with Mike Kilner from the London University Purchasing Consortia, who are a affiliate of Electronics Watch. He will be presenting on the situation in public procurement with COVID-19. Mike.
Let me just. Good morning. Hopefully everyone can see an unfortunate picture of myself.
Need to see your presentation perspective again.
It's on the wrong.
It's on the wrong monitor. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Now we see the slide.
You see the slides? Okay.
Yeah, only the slide.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And so you should see a picture so that if anybody wants to grab me when we return to the glorious world of events and meetings sometime in the future, then obviously you know what I look like at the moment without beard, unfortunately, but you should be able to find me. So, so whether you're in Central, I don't know, if you're in UK, still good morning. If you're in Central Europe or further east, good afternoon or good evening. I'm delighted to be invited to speak to all of you today. LUPC joined as a founder member of Electronics Watch now way back in April 2014, and 4 years later, our board approved affiliation on behalf of all full LUPC members. I've served on the Electronics Watch Board of Trustees since its inaugural meeting in October 2014, and the important work being undertaken there is far more than a personal side project. This is something that both myself and my colleagues on the Electronics Watch board feel very passionate about. One of my key duties is to lead on the National Desktop and Notebook Agreement, a UK framework with a total spend of just under £500 million across its 4 years, with close to 200 participating public sector institutions. The majority of these are either universities or research-based bodies. The last iteration commenced in September 2017. Tendering and subsequent management and dialogue is undertaken directly with the ICT original equipment manufacturers, or OEMs, as I'll abbreviate from here. These brand OEMs in our case are currently Dell, HP, Lenovo, Dynabook Toshiba, Acer, and 2 UK desktop OEMs, Stone and XMA. I'm going to begin with a look at our engagement with these OEMs, including a small selection of their responses. I'll then touch on some of the difficulties for public sector organizations, such as ourselves, in obtaining detailed information, including government censorship and the present threats to China's competitive position. And before I land either LUPC or Electronics Watch in any hot water, all the views expressed here are my own. So hopefully you're on a timeline from January 2020 slide. With at least one of the named OEMs with a manufacturing hub within the COVID-19 epicenter of Wuhan province, and early reports of outbreaks elsewhere across the country, each of the 7 OEMs on the NDNA were contacted back on 29th of January. There was an increasing lockdown of internal and external travel in and around China following the appalling and escalating number of deaths arising from the outbreak. Around the time as this unfolding human crisis, we saw order schedules impacted by, obviously, not only the crisis, but Intel's ongoing and well-documented processor production issues. This would in different ways begin to severely impact worker welfare and well-being. Received responses were collated and shared across NDNA buyers in early February, then updated periodically as further information became available, including that from newswires such as the Taiwan-based DigiTimes, for example. By this time, there was already a widespread impact on the ICT supply chain. The resumption of production after the Chinese New Year was delayed for a week or more at many centers. With a limited number of workers able or willing to return to work, notebook original design manufacturers, or ODMs, such as Quanta and Compel, were seeing utilization rates as low as 50%. From a category perspective, notebooks were to be in the center of a demand surge that left vendors and channel partners scrambling. To contain the virus, China and many manufacturing centers issued a stay-at-home order, which dramatically limited manufacturing capacity. Meanwhile, border lockdowns and the large-scale withdrawal of international airline traffic presented huge challenges for those shipping components, both domestically and internationally. Following the publication of the recommendations outlined by the Economics Rights Institution and Electronics Watch, as titled in this slide, we wrote again to the OEMs in March with the summary of the concerns raised in the paper, together with an article that endorsed the view that workers in China were now working under intense pressure. And this is a copy of the FT article that was mentioned in the letter to the OEMs. For those who want to wish it in more detail, once the presentations have been shared with attendees, and also applies to any of the quotes in the remaining slides. As noted in the article, we're currently working 7 days a week. We're really under the pump right now because of a shortage of factory workers. The next 3 slides, I will share 3 of the 7 responses which have been anonymized. The first is of the more generic response, one that you feel that while stating legal compliance was put together to perhaps move the issue off the table as quickly as possible. For those listening who enjoy the occasional game of table tennis like myself, this is the equivalent of floating the ball back to an opponent with a pimples out bat who's only interested in a forehand defensive push. The second has been shortened and tackles some of the specific issues raised by the epidemic, including both physical protection and labor protection. This is also representative of when local OEM account managers successfully work with you in opening up engagement at a global level, whether it's the sustainability lead in either, for example, the States or closer to China, for example. I will leave this up for a short moment before moving on to the third quote. The third provides a small degree of insight into health and safety training, and the on-the-ground financial assistance is commendable. There are, however, gaps in significant areas such as working hours, pay, and shift patterns. And on the demand front, we had notebook OEMs commenting, we have seen, this is by early March, we have seen an unprecedented surge in laptop requirements across all areas of our business. We have sold more in the last 2 days than we sold in the whole month of January, and our stocks are very much depleted, in fact, almost gone. I'm getting hourly updates on the situation, but the requests have not quietened down. So this would have indirectly translated into factories working additional shifts and longer hours in order to meet that customer demand, which has obviously been touched on in previous presentations. I know how many of you love a small business underdog like Amazon. What we didn't want to see, and haven't really observed amongst our IT OEMs, were the kind of headlines the likes of Amazon was making across the globe for the wrong reasons. Stories of walkouts over safety concerns, the refusal to pay sick leave, and workers being fired or criticizing working conditions. Seeing these type of headlines would have, in all likelihood, increased the general defensiveness of the Chinese authorities and the desire to restrict the flow of any negative information relating to the epidemic in their country. Looking at government influence in China, Honhai Foxconn, China's largest ODM, went on a PR offensive, publicly sharing the list of incentives used to encourage the return and recruitment of more employees at its major assembly plants in Shenzhen and Chengzhou. This included free shuttle bus commuting and meals and accommodation for workers, in addition to thorough disinfection operations at plant sites. They reportedly also raised the extra bonus from previously around 3,000 Chinese yuan, that's $430 US, to between 5,000 to 7,000 Chinese yuan for both returning and newly recruited employees seeking to ease labor shortages as soon as possible. How much is being directly screened by the Chinese government is open to conjecture, but there's no doubt that online censorship has never been more robust. There will be little leeway afforded to businesses wishing to maintain a presence in China. It is perhaps unsurprising that the level of disclosure remains restricted, as evidenced in this article, for example, which is part of a longer piece of journalism for those who want to read further. In there, it mentions that the experience mirrored that what infamously happened to the Wuhan doctor Li Wenliang, who tried to alert colleagues about the spread of a mysterious virus in a chat group, only to be called to a police station and forced to sign a confession for spreading rumors. When Dr. Li died of the coronavirus, waves of mourning and anger swept across China's internet, the underlying volatility seeded in part by the year-long protests in Hong Kong against the government that swept across the globe as one of the major news stories of 2019. Any worker-led grievances are therefore very likely to be suppressed across both social and written media alike. Keyword algorithms will be used to constantly check and, where necessary, remove offending materials in order to present the rosiest possible picture to the outside world. We have seen this elsewhere recently. For example, on June the 7th, the Brazilian government was accused of censorship after it stopped releasing its total numbers of COVID-19 cases and deaths and wiped an official site clean of swathes of data. We did follow up in a number of areas, including whether effective measures have been put in place by the OEMs to replace in-person monitoring at their ODM partners, for example. Obtaining anything of greater value has been difficult at this time, although others may have had more success. And this is still an ongoing dialogue with the likes of Dell and HP. One of the secondary outcomes from the COVID-19 situation is that China's economic boom and high relative employment figures, I should say, which are already under pressure from the ongoing trade war with the United States, will more than likely deteriorate further within the foreseeable future. This will inevitably impact and reduce the relative power and welfare of workers, particularly those from migrant backgrounds. While the epidemic has left company balance sheets in a state not necessarily fit to contemplate macro-scale location changes, the envious advantage that China once had is certainly not as strong as it once stood. This is illustrated in these articles from CNBC and Forbes, Japan Times, and BBC Bloomberg. The latter will hardly have helped relations between India and China, which are engaged in another territorial border skirmish only very recently. And of course, Omana touched upon the assistance being given by the Indian government within their borders at this time and reduced oversight in terms of labor regulations. That concludes my short presentation, in which I hope you found something of interest. And I'm going to hand back to Peter and any questions.
Thank you, Mike. This was really great. Also that you gave a bit of a background how you as a procurer are looking at these kind of general developments. Without further ado, what I would like to do is
Peter, I don't think we can hear you.
Yes, I was kicked out and kicked in. So if you can hear me and you can see the Q&A slides, yes. I'm back, and maybe we have some questions, Björn.
Okay, well, I can take some in the order that they came in. I'll start with a question from Christian Martin, which is a quick question because it's one that I can answer quickly. Whilst writing questions into a tender is the most effective way of challenging our suppliers, as an interim measure, could Electronics Watch develop a template letter for its members to complete and send to our suppliers? As both Peter and Omana have mentioned, we do have a couple of tools available on our website publicly. We have a series of questions, as Christian suggests, that we suggest that you do incorporate into a tender process about how companies are protecting workers during this time. And I would just like to say yes to Christian, that we can develop a template letter in addition, and to invite anybody who's listening who's interested in being part of, using such a template letter, to contact anybody that you know within Electronics Watch and let us know. So that's the first question. Let's see now, there were some other questions too that have disappeared from my view, but let me see if I can find them. We had one question, I think, about overtime. I see that Tuha has answered it in writing already, but perhaps to answer it for everybody, we should do this verbally, and other people can chime in as well, other than Tuha, if you want. The question is this: reduction in overtime working features a lot. What are the reasons for so much reliance on overtime working? So perhaps Tuha, you can start here.
Yeah, AI has responded. There are numbers of reasons for reliance on overtime working. The first one is that the minimum wage in Vietnam are relatively low and can only cover the modest living costs, especially in urban areas and industrial zones. And if the worker want to save more money and to send back to their hometown for their families, they want to work more overtime to earn more money. The second reason is that the overtime payment in Vietnam is will be calculated differently during the weekdays and weekends and holiday. So it increased quite high than the standard hour. For example, if you work overtime during weekday, you will get 150% higher. 50% higher. And if you work on Sunday, you will get double the payment. If you work on holiday, you get 300% of the payment. So the OT payment will be quite high during the Sunday or holidays. And if you work during night shift, you will get even extra 20%. So this make a large part of the income for the worker. And I think another reason is that because some workers, not many workers are permanent workers. Many electronics workers are temporary workers or with a short-term contract, so they want to earn a lot of money as much as possible, I have to say. And so they try to work OT to earn more income. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Tuha. Indeed, we do see this incredible reliance on overtime across the electronic sector in many countries for the reasons that you spell out here. There's another question for you, Tuha, from Antonio Ramirez. And the question is this: thank you for the sobering data. Can you advise how you conducted the surveys that fed into your presentation? How many people were interviewed? How easy was it to get access to the workers? Did the interviews comment on the workers' attitudes when responding to the surveys, i.e., did the workers give the impression they could speak freely when interviewed? Thank you.
So as presented, maybe you might skip one of the slides in my presentation. We have interviewed 59 workers via phone, and this is phone-based call interview. But before making the call, we have been in long-term contact with those workers. We have been supporting the worker in this area for nearly 10 years with different activities, and we use the snowball technique. And the worker, we introduce their friends or colleagues, and we continue the route. So despite the social distancing, we still keep connect with the worker through phone and social network. And I have to say that this is not only one-time call. We have to be back with the worker for several times to make sure that they are in good, they are comfortable, and they're freely to talk, and they are consulted in terms of the consensus before the interview. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tuha. Now we have a quite small and easy question from Chris Stevens. The question is intended for Mike Kilner, but Chris is also inviting anybody on the panel to share your reflections. It is not a small question, so it's a quite big one. So the question is, do you think we will see a worldwide shift for manufacturing away from global, just in time, to local, just in case, ahead of a potential second peak in COVID-19 and its negative impact for workers around the world? How do we maintain good international collaboration that has been evident with public sector procurement? So Mike, do you want to try to answer this question first off?
Okay. It seems like two questions. One's about, I think the first part's about global manufacturing, which was touched upon in the presentation. The second one, I think, is very much, I suppose, on maybe you're better to answer in terms of maybe electronics watch and further collaboration, but I can maybe chime in as well. But the first part, yeah, I mean, we said we're already seeing India, many other Southeast Asian tigers offer incentives for companies to move away from perhaps a complete reliance on what we've seen as super scale dormitories, which were planned and set up from the sort of 1990s onwards, because of issues around reliance on one center, production and especially assembly. So we've certainly seen, for example, a number of the Taiwanese ODMs I mentioned, Compal, Quanta, Wistron's another one, where they've actually started to relocate some of their production back into either Taiwan or to somewhere within the vicinity of that. So, for example, South Korea, or maybe even in some cases Japan, in order to provide secondary centers. And again, one of the issues is that simply because of the economic crisis, which has unfolded or is gradually unfolding around the world, the balance sheets aren't necessarily always there to simply do that, as it would have been maybe 12 months ago. They haven't perhaps got the capitalization available to do that in all cases as well. So it's very much a bit of a guessing game what happens next. But I think you will see greater contingency being set up because of, say, future pandemics. That will certainly occur. Whether that will mean production back towards close to the buyers, so for example, moving to America, as Mr. Trump wishes at the moment, or whether to close the centers in, say, Europe, that is again a bit of a watching game, but I think it will happen to some extent.
Björn, if I could also comment on this, I think one of the big drivers here in relocations that we are seeing currently out of China is, as Mike also mentioned during his presentation, is actually the current US administration's trade policy, because this is actually a long-term driver. Crises such as COVID-19 in a different way have been already visible in the electronics industry. You might recall, I think it was 10 years ago or even longer, there was a huge flood in Thailand, which basically broke the hard disk drive industry, which basically broke every laptop and every desktop computer production. The electronics industry, if it's about these short-term disruptions of markets, this is not a driver, I have the impression, of relocation. Things like trade policies, where they know that if they don't have manufacturing outside of China, they will not have business for years. This is something where we will see huge changes. And obviously now the COVID-19 crisis kind of plays into this, but I think the main driver is really the anti-China policy pursued by Trump.
Okay, thank you very much, both of you, for these answers. We do have a few more questions, and I do want to let people know that if we do not get to your questions here, we will follow up in writing in a report to all of you who participated in this webinar. So we will try to answer your question one way or another. Let me ask you a quick question. This is also for you, Mike. And this is from Philip Tepper. As a modern procurer, I think you see yourself as a modern procurer. How much time and effort do you or can you spend on informing yourself to make informed decisions? Do you see contract management being strengthened because of, quote unquote, the new normal?
That's an interesting question. Informing yourself to make informed decisions. I think most people in IT procurement probably keep a close eye on the news wires globally, which is where we're picking up stories of Wuhan's ongoing crisis right at the start of January, because that will start to affect, for example, component suppliers and indeed assemblers within that province. And that's reported, and that's reporting across most of the sort of standard news wires, as I mentioned, like DigiTimes, but there are plenty of others. DRAM exchange, for example, for component costs, you'd have a link into that if you want to do, as we quote unquote, good procurement. And these sort of things would be reported, because as component costs increase, it's usually tied into, for example, some kind of production issue, labor issue, or environmental disaster, as we've seen, for example, with earthquakes and memory pricing. So you have your sort of, as a giant spider's web, you have your feelers out there, and you keep informed decisions, and keep abreast of those changes as quickly as you can do. You have to. And of course, we know, as I haven't really sort of gone into much detail, but it didn't take very long for those OEMs to come back, and in many cases offer or request price increases, because, for example, they were seeing increases in both component costs and especially increases in logistics costs with the closure of many of the airline routes. So it's all it's all very much intertwined, and nothing sort of stands as an island. It's all very much interwoven between each other. I don't know if that answers the question.
From our perspective, from Electronics Watch perspective, I think that we can see that the time that people who really are pushing the boundaries of responsible public procurement, which certainly people in LEPC and other affiliates and many other institutions in Europe and around the world are doing right now, requires quite a bit of learning, and we have a lot of respect for the work that people within public administrations are doing in order to educate themselves on so many different issues. And now, of course, with the COVID-19 outbreak, this is becoming even more challenging and even more necessary. So I think that the question really hits on an essential point here, that internal education and training on these issues has been and will be only more and more important. I do see a couple of other questions also directed towards you, Mike, but as we're short on time, I wanted to take the liberty to raise a question that I had, and which goes to any of the panelists or all of the panelists. And the question really is about an open-ended question about what do you see as best practice during the COVID-19 pandemic to protect workers? And I'm struck by some of the figures that Tuha showed. For example, that 40% of the workers that you interviewed report that the income had been reduced between 20 and 50%. And particularly then that 60% of the workers that you worked with said they don't see a solution. So there's a degree of hopelessness here, which is a little bit alarming, I would say. So that's why I'm wondering if we can maybe, in the couple of minutes that's left here, can people highlight something that you see as a really good practice, either something that's already being done, perhaps, or something that you think is viable and should be done? And I really would like to open it up to all panelists to address this question, and anybody can begin.
I can share my reflection when I was speaking to all our monitoring partners about the situation on the ground. And one of the things which really struck me was our partner from the Philippines, who was saying that the comparison between workplaces which were unionized and not, and from her observation, most cases, she noticed that workplaces which were organized, workers were really able to, get safety equipment, masks, testing being done, changes in the workplace because of COVID. It was much more stronger, and they were able to get to what they need. I think this is, even though this is very basic, it really shows a difference in this critical time.
Okay. Yeah, I think we've seen in many other situations too that really, when workers are really well organized, when they have a strong collective voice, they often tend to be safer. I think there's a lot of studies, a lot of evidence to that across many industries. So, Peter, I think we are running out of time. You may want to
We are running out of time. Yes. So thank you all for your participation. Thank you all for the questions you had. And thank you, obviously, for the presenters for their work that they put into to give us this overview of what is actually happening out there in mining, in manufacturing, and also how public procurement is actually already reacting to this. Obviously, we hope always with an impact for improving the situations of workers and communities. So thank you for participating in this webinar, and goodbye. Oh, this was